No one in the dusty training yard expected the silence to fall that quickly. It wasn't the kind that drifted down gently. It snapped into place, heavy and abrupt, like a door slammed shut by an unseen hand. A half-circle of new recruits watched the woman standing at the end of the firing lane, their smirks still lingering, not yet aware they were seconds from dying of embarrassment. The air held the scent of hot brass and sun, baked gravel, but beneath it lived something colder, the quiet cruelty of doubt aimed at a person who had earned far more respect than she received. They called her the vet, not out of admiration, but because none of them believed she had once been the quiet heartbeat of elite operations. To them she was another instructor, shorter than expected, with calm eyes instead of scars, carrying a presence too soft to match the myths surrounding Navy SEALs. A few whispered that her file had to be inflated, that she was some administrative officer granted an honorary patch. Others openly wagered that she couldn't hit a target 10 meters away. The disrespect wasn't spoken loudly. It didn't need to be. It lived in raised eyebrows, in suppressed laughter, in the casual arrogance of men too young to understand the gravity of what they mocked. And she felt every ounce of it, not as an injury, but as a familiar weight, one she had carried in war zones far more dangerous than this. The moment that ignited everything came without warning. One of the recruits, broad, shouldered and eager to impress the others, tossed a challenge into the air like a careless spark. "Bet she misses," he said, then, louder because courage often grows in groups, "Bet all of us she misses every shot." It was not the words that froze the yard. It was her lack of reaction. She didn't glare or flinch. She simply inhaled as though tasting the air, feeling something ancient settle inside her. Her silence cut deeper than anger. It carried the stillness of someone who had seen lives end in the spaces between breaths. Around her the recruits shifted, suddenly uneasy. The wager, once amusing, now hung like a threat above their heads. They didn't understand why the atmosphere had shifted too subtly, but something in her posture made their hearts beat faster, as if instinct warned them that they had just poked a sleeping legend. The sun hovered behind her, outlining her in a faint ring of gold, and the breeze tugged lightly at the sleeves of her faded training shirt. Her hands were steady, the hands of someone who had once calmed terrified teammates under night skies lit by tracer fire. The firing lane stretched ahead like a memory she had walked 1,000 times. She approached the rifle rack with the quiet confidence of someone returning home. Dust lifted beneath her boots, catching the sunlight in tiny sparkling bursts. She lifted her rifle, its weight familiar, its cold metal almost affectionate. The recruits expected theatrics, perhaps some angry lecture or a dramatic display. Instead, she simply checked the chamber with a movement so precise, so practiced, that silence deepened around her. Then, without turning, she spoke a soft, almost gentle voice that drifted across the yard but hit like a hammer. "One shot is enough." The recruits weren't sure if they heard a threat, a promise, or something far more dangerous, the truth. When she stepped onto the firing line, the temperature seemed to shift. Even the air stilled, as though waiting for something sacred. Her breathing slowed, her shoulders lowered, and her heartbeat, though no one could hear it, fell into the rhythm she had learned in the kind of darkness that tested the soul more than the body. She raised the rifle, she didn't blink, she didn't hesitate, and in the span of a single breath, the entire yard felt the impossible certainty that she would not miss. Not today, not ever. The moment stretched not long, not dramatic, simply precise. A thin beam of sunlight glinted along the edge of the rifle barrel as she settled her stance. The recruits watched from behind, the arrogance draining from their faces, replaced by an unease they couldn't explain. There was no tension in her posture, no tremor in her hands. She looked instead like someone remembering a language her body had never forgotten. The target stood 50 meters away, unmoving, distant, almost insignificant. Yet the air between her and them felt charged, like the space before a storm breaks. She exhaled slowly, a breath too controlled to belong to anyone ordinary. Something about that breath, its steadiness, its calmness, made the recruits shift uncomfortably, as if they were witnessing something private, something sacred. She squeezed the trigger with the gentleness of someone closing a door quietly behind them. The shot cracked, sharp but clean, slicing through the stillness. The target quivered, a perfect bullseye. There was no celebration, no visible satisfaction. She simply lowered the rifle, her expression unchanged. One of the recruits whispered a curse under his breath, shock, not admiration, and before their awe could fully form, she raised the rifle again. Another breath, another shot, another bullseye. By the third, something deeper settled in the recruits' chests. An unfamiliar heat that wasn't embarrassment anymore. It was respect awakening, slow and reluctant, like a truth they had tried to ignore, now demanding to be acknowledged. The fourth shot landed dead center, splitting the already torn circle of the first. The target looked as though it had been carved by a master craftsman, each mark precise and merciless. The fifth came with the softest blink of sunlight, her stillness almost eerie, and when it struck, when that final bull's eye bloomed in the exact heart of the paper, the yard felt hushed, reverent. 5 shots, 5 perfect centers, no hesitation, no wasted motion, every bullet guided by a discipline far beyond their comprehension. She lowered the rifle fully now, letting its weight settle gently against her body. Her eyes looked distant, as though she were listening to echoes only. She could hear voices of teammates lost, memories of nights where perfection meant survival. Behind her, the recruits stood rigid. Their earlier laughter felt childish now, cruel even. Something heavy pressed on them, not guilt but realization. They hadn't mocked a woman who couldn't shoot. They had mocked someone who had earned a place in silence, in shadows, in missions that would never be spoken of aloud. One recruit, the same broad-shouldered one who had made the wager, opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. He simply stared at the bullet holes, understanding too late that his arrogance had been seen, measured, and dismissed without malice. She didn't turn toward them. She didn't need to. Her voice drifted back, soft enough to be gentle, sharp enough to leave a mark. Skill isn't proven by noise. The recruits swallowed their pride. The yard felt smaller now, or perhaps they felt smaller within it. She walked toward the targets with slow, purposeful steps. Each footfall, muted by dust, carried the weight of someone who had walked towards danger countless times. The heat shimmered around her, distorting her outline slightly, giving her an almost spectral silhouette, like a ghost who had survived her battles and carried their memories with her. When she reached the target, she didn't touch it. She simply looked at the cluster of perfect holes, her expression unreadable. The paper fluttered gently in the wind, as if bowing to her achievement. Behind her, the recruits remained silent, waiting, perhaps for a reprimand, perhaps for forgiveness. But she offered neither. She stood in quiet contemplation, the way someone might reflect on a past self glimpsed unexpectedly in a mirror. In the distance, a bird called, breaking the silence with a soft, distant note. It felt strangely symbolic, like the world itself acknowledging what the recruits had just witnessed. They had challenged a legend, they had doubted her. And she had answered not with anger, but with perfection. As she turned back toward the recruits, her footsteps brushed lightly across the gravel, each step measured, unhurried, as if the world itself had slowed to match her calm. The sunlight caught the faint lines around her eyes, not marks of age, but of endurance, etchings formed by nights spent awake, listening for threats in the dark, steadying the breath of teammates shaken to steady their own. The recruits, for the first time since meeting her, didn't see a quiet instructor. They saw the ghost of battle, worn resilience wearing a calm human face. The broad-shouldered recruit shifted uneasily. His swagger had evaporated, replaced by something rawer shame mixed with an unspoken longing for guidance from someone who had mastered what he only pretended to understand. He tried to meet her gaze, but when her eyes lifted to meet his, they held a depth that made him look away almost instantly. There was no anger in them, no reproach, only a truth he wasn't ready for. She passed them without speaking, setting the rifle back onto the rack with a quietness that carried more weight than any reprimand. The recruit's eyes followed her hands as if drawn by gravity. They watched how she handled the weapon, not as an object, but as an extension of memory and discipline. There was reverence in her movements, the kind born not from the thrill of skill, but from respecting the cost of it. One of the younger recruits swallowed hard. He had laughed the loudest earlier. Now he felt his throat tighten with regret. He didn't know why it hurt to see her walk away, but it did, because she had proven them wrong, without humiliating them. She had responded to doubt with grace, and that grace hit harder than any scolding ever could. The instructor overseeing their training stood at a distance, having witnessed everything without intervening. He watched her with the faintest touch of awe, the kind reserved for those who no longer seek recognition. He knew her past, or parts of it, enough to understand that what she showed today was not demonstration, but restraint. If she had wanted to, she could have broken the recruits' spirits. Instead, she had chosen to teach them something else, humility without humiliation. But the day wasn't done with her. It never was. As she stepped toward the shade near the training shed, a memory flickered through her mind, uninvited, sharp, too vivid. A night long ago, a desert wind cutting through the ruins of a broken safe house, the shattered silence broken by the steady rhythm of her breath as she steadied her weapon, guiding her team out of an ambush. She had been the last one standing that night, the only one who could still shoot straight. Her throat tightened slightly at the recollection. The ache didn't come from loss alone, but from the strange truth that perfection in moments of survival never feels like victory. It feels like carrying the weight of those who didn't walk away. The present snapped back into place as the broad-shouldered recruit took a hesitant step forward. His boots scraped against the dirt, a small sound that felt enormous in the hush of the yard. He stopped a few feet behind her, uncertain, the sun casting his shadow long across the ground. His voice, when it finally came, was quiet, so quiet it barely rose above the breeze. "Ma'am, I didn't know." She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Instead, she let the silence breathe between them, a silence that forced him to confront his own words, his own assumptions, his own arrogance. "You weren't asked to know," she said gently. "You were asked to learn." Her words didn't sting. They settled instead, deep, grounding, humbling. The recruit lowered his head, not because she demanded it, but because he understood he had been looking at skill through the wrong lens. He had measured respect by volume, assuming that quiet was weakness and confidence needed to be loud to be real. Another recruit stepped forward, tentative but earnest. "Can you teach us the way you shoot?" This time she did turn, her expression soft but unwavering. They weren't asking for tricks or shortcuts. They were asking for discipline, for understanding, for a glimpse into the world she had navigated with precision and pain. "I can teach you to shoot," she said, "but only you can decide who you're becoming." Her words washed over them, reshaping something inside their chests. This wasn't the fierce legend they had imagined. This was someone stronger, someone who understood not just the mechanics of skill, but the burden of carrying it. The recruits nodded, silent, humbled. Something in the air shifted, not dramatic, not loud, just real. The beginnings of respect, fragile but sincere, settling into place, and she felt something shift too, an old ache loosening, a wound quietly knitting beneath the surface. Not healed, but no longer alone. The afternoon sun dipped lower, stretching long shadows across the training yard, softening the hard lines of the place. The recruits formed an uneven semicircle around her, not out of obligation, but instinct, like young soldiers gathering near a quiet fire they didn't yet understand, only knowing its warmth pulled them closer. She could see the shift in their posture, the way their shoulders lowered, the way their faces held the slightest tremor of vulnerability. Pride had been stripped away, but not their potential. She let the silence linger. It was a teacher, too, perhaps the most honest one. In war, she had learned that silence could make a person face what noise had kept buried. Here, it gave the recruits space to feel the weight of their own ignorance without collapsing beneath it. When she finally spoke, her voice carried not authority, but truth. "A shot isn't made by the finger," she said. "It's made by the mind." They leaned in, drawn to the calm conviction in her tone. She walked toward the firing line again, not to perform, but to teach. The gravel crunched softly beneath her boots. It sounded almost like a heartbeat, steady and grounded. She pointed at the distant target. Most people aim with their eyes alone. They forget their breath, their pulse, their fear. They forget that doubt travels faster than a bullet. The broad-shouldered recruit felt a pang in his chest at that. She wasn't just talking about shooting. She was talking about life, about the hesitation he had dragged with him for years, disguised as bravado. She knew it. She could see it in him the way she once saw it in rookies placed under her care long ago. Kids who thought courage looked like noise until life taught them that real bravery was often silent. Steady, deliberate. "Your breath," she continued, placing a hand gently on her ribs, "is the first weapon you learn to master. If you can steady yourself here, you can steady yourself anywhere." She lowered her hand and nodded toward the rifle rack. "Pick one." The recruits exchanged glances. Not one of them stepped forward with arrogance now. Instead, they moved with quiet purpose, choosing their weapons with a reverence absent only an hour earlier. She guided them through the basics again, but differently this time. Less mechanical, more meaningful. She corrected postures with the lightest touch, whispered adjustments that felt like secrets passed down rather than instructions demanded. Every word she spoke carried the weight of experience, sharpened in places where mistakes didn't get second chances. When the first recruit lifted his rifle, she stood behind him, not looming but anchoring. "Breathe," she said softly. "Don't fight the moment, fall into it." He inhaled, exhaled, and for the first time since arriving at training, he wasn't thinking about impressing anyone. He was thinking about the stillness she taught him to find. When he fired, the shot hit the outer ring of the target, not a bullseye, not perfect, but honest. A beginning, he lowered the rifle slowly, his lips parting in quiet disbelief. She nodded. Better to start true than pretend perfect. Another recruit stepped forward, then another. The yard filled with careful breaths, steady hands, and the soft echoes of learning. She moved among them like a quiet guardian, offering guidance without overshadowing, lending certainty where doubt threatened to surface. And somewhere in the midst of it, something inside her unclenched, a knot she hadn't realized she'd carried since the day she left her last mission. Teaching them didn't erase what she had lived through, but it gave her purpose beyond surviving her memories. She wasn't just reliving her past, she was repurposing it. As the sun kissed the horizon, painting the yard in deep amber light, she gathered them one last time. "Perfection isn't the goal," she said. "Presence is. If you can show up fully here now, in every breath you'll hit far more than targets." Her gaze swept over them, seeing not who they were in this moment, but who they might become. The recruits stood taller beneath her eyes, not out of pride, but gratitude. The broad-shouldered recruit stepped forward, his voice steady though thick with sincerity. "We were wrong," he said, "and thank you for not giving up on us." She studied him for a moment, the way she once studied teammates, learning to rebuild themselves after failure. Then she offered the smallest smile, gentle, genuine, earned. "You learn," she said quietly, "or you stay blind. Today, you chose to see." The recruits absorbed her words, each feeling their own shift, their own spark of responsibility kindling inside. As the final light faded and the yard grew cooler, the recruits dispersed slowly, talking in hushed, reflective voices. She remained where she stood, breathing in the calm. 5 perfect shots had silenced their doubts, her grace had reshaped their pride, and her quiet strength had done what noise never could. It had transformed them. The legend they challenged had not humiliated them. She had shown them the path forward, and for the first time in a long while she felt something warm unfurl inside her, a simple, steady truth. Sometimes the greatest victories are not in the battles won, but in the minds changed and the hearts guided toward a future stronger than their past.